Hello everyone, Canon Louie here, and this time the balance changes for the next League of Path of Exile Ultimatum have come out in its full entirety. And a week or so ago, or a few weeks ago, I did a video discussing the changes that was done to Harvest. And since a lot of these changes really affected me and my friend Warmonger, I thought that I would make a video talking about my thoughts on these changes. And I do want to reiterate once again that I would consider myself a casual mapper or average mapper, however you want to say it, that the highest content that I am content with doing is rare corrupted tier 16 maps. I don't do typically delirious layered maps or any of the super bosses in the game. So that is a bit of a perspective that I have on this. So if you have more experience with any of the things that I'm talking about, please clarify or let me know in the comments for some healthy discussion. So I have both the direct patch notes here for the direct numerical changes, as well as their balance manifesto. So Ultimatum League is going to be heavily focused around Vol skill gems, as well as some new life reserving mechanics that are going to be rather interesting for those who want a more complicated setup in order to gain bonuses. So we'll see how exactly that works once the skills come out and whether or not they feel good to use in combat. So I don't want to go super in-depth with all of these. I'm going to focus on primarily the ones that stand out to me the most. So they're adding more passive nodes, and the blood magic skill gem is split into 2 gems. They're really focusing on physical damage over time, life reservation, and basically anything that would be considered under the blood magic category. Corrupted blood now counts as something separate from bleeding damage, which I always thought that corrupted blood being considered bleeding was really dumb to me, because that is something that when I think of bleeding, I would never think of corrupted blood. Like in the game of Path of Exile, if I was to think of corrupted blood as something, I would almost rather think of it as something to do with chaos damage, not physical damage over time. So this does slight modifications to modifiers that reduce bleeding damage and whatnot. I think there's a certain type of boots that make it so that you're like unaffected by bleeding or something like that, so corrupted blood being separate from that probably affects very select unique items and whatnot. And also apparently they are balancing corrupted blood damage, so it's not as strong with certain modifiers. And I kind of find the blood magic corrupted blood to be one of the most annoying ailments in the game, primarily because of the bloodline mod that can appear on rare monsters, or nemesis mod, bloodline mod I think is technically what it is, where you kill enemies and then you get the corrupted blood stacks. I found that to be extremely annoying, especially playing a build that has very low physical damage reduction, and it seemed like unless you are paying attention or you get a map that like if you had a map that you fought a pack with that mod on, and then you're also cursed with vulnerability, and then like increased damage or something. There has been some instances where I just like instantly die because I have no physical damage mitigation, and it's something that I get from killing the monsters in the first place, and I thought that was incredibly dumb. But moving on, Bladestorm now has a separate bleeding modifier, and they have removed the Elder Influence weapon mods that give you a chance for poisons and bleeds to inflict double damage. And I haven't really done a huge amount with bleeding or chaos damage through poison, so I'm not entirely sure how effective their replacement is going to be, because apparently it only adds like an overtime multiplier, so it's basically additive with your other damage overtime multipliers. So we'll see how high the range is for those. But from what I have seen, these mods basically made damage overtime builds. Like, it was just that powerful. Or compared to some of the other mods, so I don't know. It would have been kind of nice instead of, well, maybe doing what they're doing with this, but also add like some other opportunities to get damage overtime multiplier, especially cold damage overtime. For some reason, I kind of feel like that one's kind of on the weaker end. I don't really I don't see cold damage overtime being used super often. So also they made it so that reservation skills, you do not actually need the required amount of resources to reserve auras now. So if you are on low life or low mana and you want to activate an aura, you still can without actually needing that specific amount to begin with, which is kind of nice. But they are also making it so that certain skills also have a mana cost included in with mana reservation, so like mines and stuff. And the reason why they're doing this is because apparently you could get Indigon to provide spell damage to mines without actually spending mana, which sounds really hilarious, but at the same time that is kind of crazy. So that kind of makes sense. They're basically nerfing a lot of the Atlas passive balancing, which, depending on which notables it is, that may or may not be good. Vol skills, they're basically just being buffed across the board, and they're making it so you can get Vol charges without needing to kill enemies when you're against bosses. So bosses now give you 6 souls per 2% life lost with a 1 second cooldown. So if you're doing huge amounts of damage, you're not going to get huge amounts of charges, but you're now going to get more souls while you're fighting unique bosses, which I think is really nice. So skill balance changes. So this is kind of like the big, as well as this stuff down here, but the skill balance stuff, they're nerfing basically every single quote meta unquote skills. So that includes Blade Vortex, Blade Blast, Toxic Rain, General's Cry with channeled skills, which I'm not exactly sure how that works, but I haven't used General Cry. So Seismic Cry, Carrion Golem, and Vitality. Vitality, I have really no idea, because basically in order to get a huge amount of benefit from Vitality, you need to do aura stacking, so that's very questionable. So Toxic Rain, I haven't really used Toxic Rain, but it seemed like if you get high enough attack speed, or if you use Toxic Rain with mines or something, you can really blitz down bosses, because every time you put spores on the ground, they have a duration. So if you can increase that duration and have high enough attack rate, you could really apply tons of chaos damage over time. And then Blade Blast, I kind of get what they mean here, but when I tried using Blade Blast, I thought it was really clunky. So I'm not entirely sure how... Well, I knew it was powerful, I just think that it's really clunky to use. And Blade Vortex, pretty much the main way to make Blade Vortex really powerful is by using a Headhunter build, or very high investment gear, from the sound of it. Carrion Golem, I mean, has been nerfed like 2 or 3 times already, so that's kind of interesting. And Season, like, basically, the Damage Warcry, I'm not really sure the necessity of that, because they were pretty much mainly for slam skills. Like, if you had really high attack speed, they only exert like 4 to 8 attacks or something like that. So if you have really high attack speed, you run out of charges from that so quickly that it wasn't really worth using. So I'm not sure about that one. Frostbomb and Wave of Conviction had their exposure lowered, as these skills provided too much of an elemental resistance reduction compared to other mechanics that have higher investment or penalties against bosses. I mean, I can see what they mean, and to some extent I do agree with that, but at the same time, though, it was basically Frostbomb and Wave of Conviction was a primary way to make elemental skills, I don't want to say be competitive, but like physical damage builds, you would go physical damage because you don't really need to deal with resistances. For an example, bosses, I think, have 50% elemental resistance in maps. So Wave of Conviction, Frostbomb, as well as a Curse would typically get rid of most of the enemy resistance to get it near that 0%, so you didn't have damage reduction, which physical damage doesn't typically need to deal with unless you have really low damage per hit. So, and they nerf these by 10%, so from minus 25% to minus 15%. So I mean, they're still useful, but at the same time, though, like, it's kind of borderline to the point of you can almost go without it if you have enough elemental penetration. This is kind of the thing that they did with Elusive. They nerfed Elusive a patch after it came out, I think. And they nerfed the base stats by 5% dodge and spell dodge, as well as minus 10% movement speed. So it basically made it so it was borderline to the matter of, should I even bother with it? But this is obviously more influential than Elusive, in my opinion. So I don't know. I mean, considering they're nerfing these without like really buffing anything back up to sort of compensate for any of that, for most of the skills that they buffed were Vol skill gems, if I recall correctly. So yeah, I'm not really I'm not really sure about that one. That one's probably fine. It's just I really didn't think it was necessary. Flesh and Stone now has 35% mana reservation from 25%. The defensive power of this skill on Sand Stance, for those of you who don't know, Sand Stance with Flesh and Stone aura made it so that enemies were blinded if they were near you, and that gave you essentially 50% evasion without needing any evasion at all. The problem with this, in my opinion, is that you can already get a Redeemer body armor mod that makes enemies blinded permanently without needing an aura to do it. Now, granted, it is a body armor, so, you know, you're sacrificing potentially like the enemies explode after they're killed modifier for my planned Crusader Redeemer body armor here. So I mean, I am making sacrifices for having that mod, especially if I want this other one here. But at the same time, though, the fact that I can get that without using an aura, and and they increase the mana reservation, oh yeah, and then this one. And the offensive power in Blood Stance was too high relative to other reservation effects, which is kind of debatable because Blood and Sand, I think, does a lot more than Flesh and Stone does in terms of damage, and it's only 10% mana reservation. I really hope that they don't nerf that reservation too, because that would really hurt melee, in my opinion. But again, I just didn't really think that this was necessary. Like, it makes it so that Flesh and Stone is now another aura that is borderline to the point of, would I rather just not bother with it and then just go with a different damaging aura instead. And then Vigilant Strike was reworked a little bit, I think. Oh yeah, previously oh yeah, they're basically nerfing the Fortify duration. It says players could gain 30 seconds of Fortify from 2 sockets and a single jewel. This was far too cheap for the defensive power it offered. I mean, in my opinion, Vigilant Strike is one of those skills that really, in my opinion, getting through 30 seconds of Fortify, especially with enough stacking of it, with how Vigilant Strike is, I don't have a problem with that. Because you can basically use Fortify with a movement skill like Leap Slam or something to gain some Fortify already. And there's even an Ascendancy champion that you can get permanent Fortify. Now, granted, with the champion, you're sacrificing 2 Ascendancy nodes in order to get permanent Fortify, but but the fact that you can put Fortify support on any melee skill and have potentially 100% uptime anyway, that's, I don't know. Didn't think that was really necessary either. Divergent Berserk, basically they're making it so that Berserk does a quarter of the effect of what it did before for more spell damage per quality. So the alternate quality of Berserk, it added to spell damage instead of attack damage, and that was the quality, and you can increase that with enhanced support. They pretty much, I mean, I haven't used this because after they nerfed the alternate quality auras and stuff after the first time, they pretty much made most alternate quality auras, especially, and certain skills completely worthless unless you are aura stacking or investing a lot into that specific thing, and it was just not really worth bothering with anymore. And it kind of feels like they're doing the same here. Like, that's a 75% nerf. So instead of getting 20% more damage, you're getting 5% more damage. So it's like, maybe for the less damage taken. It's just, they're pretty much for everything they're nerfing here, they're nerfing it hard. Oh yeah, and then this one. Quivers as caster offhands. Critical strike chance, critical strike multiplier, damage over time multiplier, and chain mods on quivers now only apply to attacks or bow skills. The Signal Fire and Rigwell's Quill's unique quivers have also changed their mods to be only on attacks. Bows with a quiver could outclass many caster options for a variety of builds, and they want the total offensive power to be more reasonable. More reasonable balance without removing the option entirely. I find this hilarious because basically everything they nerfed here was probably some of the biggest reasons why you would even use a quiver and a bow to begin with. So the funny thing that they're saying without removing it entirely, it's like, oh yeah, we're taking away probably half of what you use the quiver for, but it's still an option. And it is funny that they just put on here it's all nerfs. I appreciate the honesty. Oh yeah, this is a very big one right here. Physical explosion on body armors. So the mod from Crusader that most people love, that makes it so that enemies killed will explode, dealing physical damage by percentage of their life, is now being reduced to being a chance to explode. Now the damage is technically been buffed by like 350%, but it's now no longer a guaranteed chance to explode. So basically they're making this mod inconsistent, and also they're adding a new lower tier influence mod, making it so that it's an even lower chance. Honestly, I really do not see the point in this. Why was there a problem with the explode chest? I mean, it was, I do admit it was one of the most sought after body armor modifiers, but at the same time though, was it so influential that they needed to change it in such a way to make it not feel as good? This keeps the mechanic open up for the possibility of stacking explode chance with high investment, but will no longer reliably wipe out packs. So basically, we're going to make your build no longer feel really good, and making it only feel good a percentage of the time if you rely on the explode chest. It's just, why? This is something that with Path of Exile that in some ways isn't a bad thing, but I find to be really annoying, is that sometimes when they introduce a new mechanic and it's fine for utility purposes without a huge amount of investment, and then they nerf it in such a way to force you to need investment in order for it to feel good. One example is brands. When that spell type came out, there was at least a decent amount of attachment range to enemies without any brand attachment range investment. And then they nerfed it, so now you basically need to cast directly on top of enemies to make brands attached to enemies. Within, I mean, maybe there's like, a few AoE around the brand, but it certainly feels like it's extremely pathetic now, and you need to invest in it for it to be halfway decent. And this is one of those things where I really did not see the point in this. And it's going to make legacy explosion body armors extremely valuable. Especially since, well, now that I think of it, I was going to mention, they just added the elevated Explode Chest mod with the Maven Orbs this last patch here. So, I just don't understand the necessity of this. Now, I didn't think that explosion chests were worth it. Well, I shouldn't say worth it. I didn't think they were necessary for me personally, for how I played. I would rather have enough AoE with my attacks to kill packs with my skills rather than the Explode Chest mod, but I understand how much better it feels if you do have the Explode Chest mod. So, yeah, I really don't get that one. Harvest Monster Life, do we even care about Harvest anymore? This is another big whammy. This was basically one of the biggest things that really made Warmonger annoyed with this game. Hexproof. Modifiers that allow your hexes to attack hexproof enemies, such as Corespiri's Will, unique body armor, no longer applies your hexes to affect yourself while you are hexproof, as you are not your own enemy. This basically kills headhunting builds. The most sought after belt in the game, as far as I'm aware, is the Headhunter belt, because it allows you to get mods from rare enemies. And how to make a good headhunting build is by cursing your character with temporal chains. This allowed you to increase the duration of these headhunting buffs from the base of 20 seconds all the way up to 80 seconds. And it also allowed your flasks to also last 4 times as long. So every flask that you use typically would last like 20 seconds. So since they're doing this, you can no longer you can no longer cast temp chains on yourself if you get a hexproof mod from a rare monster, from your headhunter. So this basically means that the Headhunter belt is almost dead from this one change alone. And I find it really funny with some of the comments that one of them was like, "Oh, I can't wait to farm a Headhunter this next league." And it's like, Headhunter, with this one change, I would not be surprised if it lowered by a significant amount of the price for that belt. But I mean, of course, we'll have to wait and see, because the economy for Path of Exile isn't always the most predictable. The Poison Sextant, they completely removed that, because apparently you can... the Sextant mod granted increased damage and movement speed for each poison stack on them. And this allowed you to use the Maw of Conquest helmet to make it so poisons don't do anything to you, and therefore gain the bonuses without really much of a downside. And while I do agree with this, it's really odd that they just flat out removed it instead of trying to nerf it in some way. But I really can't say much of how powerful this was. I mean, all I know is that you can get 1%... well, get really fast characters with it, but other than that, I don't know how powerful the increased damage was. Fractured Fossils and Beast Splitting. Basically, they made Fractured Fossils completely worthless, and you can no longer rely on the Beastcrafts to split items infinitely. Basically, you can only split items once, and they'll get a split mod, which makes it so you can't split them again. So Fractured Fossils, which might have been a decent amount of your profit with delving, they're going to be pretty much useless now. And especially for the fossils, I'm not really sure. Well, the beast crafting, it sounded like they were common enough where that would make sense, but the Fractured Fossils, I don't think that was a really good change for Fractured Fossils. This is another change that baffled me. Atlas Mission Sustain. We've removed the bonus from Awakening objective bonuses for Atlas. As Atlas passives combined with the bonuses made it so you had an almost endless supply of master missions. I don't see how that is a problem whatsoever. Isn't the point of having the master missions in order an opportunity for players to play the content that they want? Because maybe people want to delve instead of doing maps. Maybe they want to do the temple. Maybe they want more beasts, which now that the split beast is not very useful, it's pretty much only for the unique beasts now, probably. I just don't understand how having an endless supply of master missions is a problem. Don't you want players to play the content that they enjoy and hopefully play the league longer? I mean, some of the balance changes that I mentioned up here, like, it made sense, but I didn't think that they're necessary. But this one, I just flat out do not understand the point of this. Because, again, you should be able to do the content that you want, hopefully, with at least some investment of some kind instead of being reliant on master missions. I don't know. Okay, Delirium item quantity and rarity. Basically, they're making it so that the item quantity and rarity used to cap out at 50% of your way through the map, and now it caps out at the maximum, like at the end of the map. So they're basically nerfing Delirium. Yeah, I don't know. They're nerfing Cluster Jewels again for Area of Effect, Skill Effect Duration, Aura Effect once again, because their massive nerf hammer wasn't big enough last time. And projectile speed. What? Projectile speed? What? What does that have to... There's probably some way of stacking projectile speed to make stuff ridiculous, but... Why? What? Okay, whatever. We are wary of how accessible normally scarce stats, such as the above, are, but they're accessible through cluster jewels. Well, the problem is that with cluster jewels, you have to invest a lot of points that don't do anything in order to gain those nodes to get those specific stats. So I mean, those cluster jewels, in a way, for me, for my builds, I rarely incorporate any cluster jewels at all, unless it's something very specific like Aura Effect. Because the cluster jewels, not only do you have to, of course, buy them or craft them, but they are a lot of investment from the tree. You have to spend like over 20 skill points in order to fill one out, and depending on certain notables, it might not even be that much better from just picking stuff on the normal tree. So, but we'll get into the aura stuff in the second notes. As a relatively minor ascendancy change, the Pain Reaver node has been replaced with a defensive one. So this right here is my build that I was planning on eventually capping out in Standard. So as you can see here, it says supposedly with all of the peak buffs of 28 million DPS. And I was going to use the Pain Reaver node for specific reasons. So this is a Hollow Palm character, and the Pain Reaver node works perfectly with Hollow Palm. You get attack speed, which you have a more attack speed modifier from Hollow Palm itself. You increase the maximum total recovery per second from leech life, and you get flat leech and attack percent for life and mana. So the problem with this is they are completely reworking this node to have none of the things that I picked this node for. So for Hollow Palm, Flawless Savagery is useless, and Warbringer is pretty much useless. So having this perfect node here was really good. But they're removing for sure the Mana Leech from it, which is my only source of Mana Leech. So that causes big issues for my build by them changing this. And now that I'm talking about it, let's get into the patch notes of where they say that change. If I can, should be Ascendancy Balance. Here we go. So they changed some things to instead do more physical damage over time instead of just bleeding, which is fine. Oh yeah, Pain Reaver has now been replaced with Defy Pain. Gain Defiance for 10 seconds after losing life on an enemy hit, and you can do so every 0.3 seconds. Increase armor per Defiance, 50% maximum leech life while you have Defiance. At 10 Defiance, take reflected damage equal to your maximum life, and then you lose all Defiance. So the biggest issue with this is that they're removing the attack speed buff, and they're removing the Mana Leech buff, which was the main two reasons why I took that node in my plan to begin with, and they're replacing it with a, quite frankly, very niche and borderline useless node. And the reason why I say this is because it relies on armor. And armor is one of the things in Path of Exile that is very unreliable, because you need a massive amount of armor for it to be useful when you want it to be useful. Armor, you need, I think, 12 armor, 12 times the armor of the hit that you took in order to have that 90% physical damage reduction. For an example, if you take a 10,000 life hit, you need 120,000 armor in order to reduce that damage by 90%, which is typically what you would want. So the amount of investment you need in armor to make it useful, especially if you rely on armor alone, it just is not worth it. It is much better to invest in endurance charges or some other way of getting flat physical damage reduction. And then on top of that, you take damage yourself by taking reflected damage equal to your maximum life. So if you don't have good physical damage reduction, or if you don't have the reduced reflected damage mods on rings or from the tree, that could really bite you. So not only did they take away from the stuff that I even bothered with that node to begin with, that I really liked about it, they replaced it with a borderline, again, like I said, very niche, borderline useless node. And then they changed a few things to affect attacks and spells. I guess they want to make the Berserker to be a little bit more versatile there. And they nerfed Assassin again, because why not? And a few other things. But yeah, I've been really, really annoyed at that change, that they removed the Mana Leech and also the attack speed, and then replacing it with something that I do not want anything to deal with. for that specific character. So that annoys me. Oh yeah, and then they're nerfing some recovery stuff with some keystones. They nerf the soul keystone that gives you maximum life as extra energy shield. I can't say how powerful this was, so maybe nerfing it by 5% was fine. I don't know. They're changing chain breaker. And then this kind of is just a hardened scar node. I'm not sure if that's a keystone or just a notable. No longer grants Fortify during any life flask. Instead, now grants Fortify while recovering life from a life flask. The notable was, okay, it is a notable, from granting Fortify too easily to any character with an enduring prefix. Again, you can use, if you have 2 links available, you can just use Fortify support with anything in order to get Fortify. So, I mean, okay, I guess they think Fortify is too easy to get. The Necromancer's Essence Glutton was reduced, mana recovery was reduced by half. And then they nerfed Primordial Aegis from Elementus from 75 damage per level, or per allocated notable, passive from 100, which I have no idea how good that was. So that was the major changes. So overall, like I said before, in a nutshell, the changes that they made, a lot of them, I think I can kind of see what they were getting at, but I really didn't think that they were necessary nerfs. I really didn't. Especially on a patch where they already gutted Harvest. So having that on top of that is very interesting. They did buff essences, surprisingly, and changed around a few things. They even buffed some Abyss-Jewels. That's interesting. Okay, and then Cluster Jewels, they added a physical damage over time multiplier, but then they nerfed, where is the aura ones? Oh yeah, they nerfed from 8% to 6% for first among equals, and then they nerfed the specific aura ones from 20% of specific auras down to 15%. So they nerfed that quite significantly as well for that. So yeah, I think that's pretty much the gist of it. Oh yeah, and then they're, like I said, when they nerfed stuff, they nerfed it hard. Like for Blade Blast, you go from a higher end of 418 down to 315. Like, that's huge. It's like a 30% nerf, almost, or 20% nerf. And the added effectiveness, they nerfed Blade Vortex by 15-20%. And stuff, so they definitely have done a lot of things. And also Carrying Golem 11% less damage, and then they made Toxic Rain spread out more, so you can't so it's not as easy to focus down one enemy. Your single target damage is reduced, and then the movement speed debuff that it gives is halved. So they kind of gutted that one too. Although not directly with the damage, but just how it spreads and whatnot. And some of the Vol skills, like Vol Cold Snap, like look at this. Base radius is now 32 from 15, so they just doubled the AoE. and then the damage effectiveness from 200% to 350%. Honestly, if you can have a lot of added cold damage, I think that would be really fun to have like a cold snap nuking build. But more on to specifically what I wanted to talk about. So with these changes, in addition to the harvest nerfs, I really think that they went too far on this one. Basically, they nerfed every single major meta skill that people were using. Now, I'm not against having the meta change by either nerfs or buffs. I would prefer it by buffing underutilized skills like they have done before. But with this one, instead of doing that, they pretty much just directly nerfed these meta skills. And also the higher end builds that you would want to shoot for eventually when you had enough currency. You know, goals to reach. For an example, in Standard League, I was thinking about potentially making a headhunting self-cursor blade vortex build that Warmonger has also made for himself. But of course we don't have the currency right now, but it was something that I was looking forward to possibly doing in the future, or using this character with a physical damage aura stacker, using Pride and Flesh and Stone, War Banner and all that with aura stacking. So, since they basically removed major components of my build with Pain Reaver, it's borderline if I can even use this build anymore. Like, I would have to remove the Anoint from Revenge of the Hunted and probably put it on like Spirit Void instead, just to have some sort of mana leech. And yeah, I had life leech somewhere else apparently. So that is really discouraging to me. And they nerfed aura stackers, which I thought their first nerfing of it should have been good enough, especially with my own aura stacker, who again couldn't do his own damage. I had to rely on other players in order to deal damage. It wasn't a self-damage aura stacker. So it was purely to add defense, well, primarily add defense and a little bit of damage to whoever I was playing with. So, in addition to the harvest nerfs, like I said, I think they went too far with this one. And in all honesty, because of these changes, I have really no motivation to play anymore. Like, I was thinking of maybe making some sort of deep delving build for Standard League. And they nerfed Fractured Fossils, which was probably one of the bigger source of currency from playing deep delving. And then on top of that, I didn't want to play Mines again. So I wasn't really sure what all I wanted to play to do that anyway. So I mean, I didn't really have like a huge amount of ideas for league starting builds, and maybe I'll use some of I'll try out the new damage over time gems that they came up with. But again, in the long run, I now have a lot less motivation to work towards anything. Like Headhunter, again, like I said, that's pretty much now a niche thing. That's most like really successful builds are going to be dead if they use Temporal Chains to extend that buff duration because of that hexproof modifier that they did. And this build, they gutted by changing one Ascendancy node. So I just really don't know what I would play. And also with the nerfs, like I am just really unmotivated to really try anything that this league has to offer because of a few things. The server stability and lag and whatever has been pretty much steadily decreasing. Well, maybe not decreasing, but it has been borderline really frustrating to deal with since probably Betrayal League, I think people were saying. So that has never really been super fun to deal with. And then on top of that, GGG continuing to make changes like this with justifying it with, oh, well, we want certain things, like you have to go all in investment in order to make something half decent, or harvest. That I just one of the few ways that you could actually make your own items without just flat out gambling for them with items. They thought that was too much. It's just, well, what I'm trying to say here is, with all the changes, whether or not they actually affect the way that I play, or if they really affect me in the long run, these changes have really made it so that I am considering playing something else. If I want to do the same genre, I'm starting to look at potentially playing other games, because GGG, even though that they have really good ideas, and for skill gems, their just general game in terms of what you can put together and what interacts with other things, is really interesting. Like, you know, if you want to use a bow build that changes your bow attack into mines that chain and whatnot, that is really cool, and you can do that with Path of Exile. But time and time again, it seems like they don't want to make certain quality of life things. They keep making certain nerfs that just, that maybe they are justified, and I'm just not really in a position to say, but directly affect some of my future goals with this game. And it's just really hard. And I've been doing a league review of just putting out my thoughts of my first impressions of pretty much every league since, I think it was either Delve League or the league before that. And this is the first league I am genuinely considering of just flat out skipping. And for someone who has played 2,000 hours of Path of Exile and played every league since probably 3.0, that I think that should say something. Like I'm really considering, if I want to play a game like Path of Exile, I might be leaning towards like Last Epoch or some of these other games that have the quality of life and at least potentially some of what Path of Exile has to offer, but without the design philosophy of Path of Exile that just really keeps annoying me with this game. No, when I say that, I mean like design philosophy of basically whenever I play Path of Exile for stuff, basically every time I die from something, it's typically not something that I really could do anything about skill-wise in order to avoid it. Like having monsters attack you off-screen, or have monsters spawn in such a way that they, like, I had one I had one instance or two where monsters spawned crisscross from my character location, and it was Owl's influence, so they did chaos damage, and I just get one-shotted just from monsters spawning in such a way. And things like that. Like, you really need a lot of defensive layers in order to feel tanky, and one of my ways of doing that was me and Warmonger had invested in aura bots now in order to basically give us close to the maximum damage reduction, well, maybe not max, but good amount of damage reduction, in order to just have fun with the game and not constantly die from stuff that get very frustrating. So, yeah. Like I said, this is the first league, and this is the day of the league start. I don't think I'm even going to play on the league start, because I just have no build ideas. Since the few that I had, they changed in such a way that I can't do anything with them. So, yeah. I think I got a bit too rambly, but I think that pretty much sums up my thoughts with these changes. I mean, GGG can make whatever game that they want to make. That's fine. But it just seems that, for me personally, they keep doing stuff. Well, with this patch specifically, they did a lot of stuff that I would make goals for, that they are gutting just completely. And most of the more fun builds they are heavily nerfing, and stuff like that, and some of the quality of life stuff. So we'll see, but that's what I'm leaning towards. So I know this kind of got rambly, and was probably less focused than my Harvest League Harvest Changes discussion, but I just wanted to put this video out there saying that with these changes, it was one of the first times that I am genuinely considering of looking for other options other than this game in order to fill this genre, if I want to continue playing this genre, because I have other games that I've been playing. So really, I mean, with what they have named this league, Ultimatum, this is the Ultimatum. And a side mention should be made that I saw their trailer for the next acts of Path of Exile 2, and I was really excited for them. It looked really good, but this pretty much kills all of that I got from that. And I've been saying to Warmonger, if some of these fundamental changes or quality of life changes, and some of the things that really need to be addressed are not addressed in Path of Exile 2, I think we're probably going to be done with this game. Stuff like item acquisition. Why is it so that 99.99% of the items that you pick up are completely worthless, even if they're rare? Pretty much the only way to get really good items is by fighting specific bosses to get certain uniques that might be useful, or by crafting it, or just flat out buying it, and various things along those lines that I'm not going to get into. But of course, just like, most forums thing, most of them don't really go super in depth of anything, classic POG response. And also someone wants to nerf Delve. It's like, I really can't say how good Delve is, but at the same time, though, whatever. I don't think Delve is too strong. I think you have to put a lot of investment in a good build in order to deep delve effectively. So yeah, rip fractured maps by splitting. And some people are actually genuinely excited for these nerfs. I mean, we'll see how the meta changes and what people do with all these nerfs, but we'll see. But as most of the responses, at least in the first few pages, are not super constructive of their thoughts on some of this. So without rambling any further, that's where I'll end it right now. And if we do genuinely, if me and Warmonger genuinely think of choosing a different game, I think I'll bring him on for one of these discussions and discuss to put more in depth of the problems that we have with this game and why we would leave from that. I think his direct input would be good on those, even though that we are, for the most part, on the same page of many of the things that we think about this game. So with that, if just as I said at the start, if I am misinformed about something, or if you have experience with some of these builds that I just don't know about, or you want to put your thoughts in the comments, I encourage a healthy discussion on these topics as well. And with that, if you are trying out Ultimatum League, I hope you have a really good league start. And I hope that these nerfs aren't going to affect most of you too much. But we'll definitely have to see how it goes. And with that, if I do make a league review, I'm not sure when I would make it. It would definitely be delayed compared to usual. I do usually make a league review within a few days, with the focus of being for the players who might be on the fence of whether or not to invest in the league at all. But I'm not sure if I'm going to do one for this patch. Like I said, there is a large likelihood that I'll skip this league altogether. So with that, thank you very much for watching and have a wonderful day.